You made a choice today. Maybe you chose coffee over tea, or picked this video over 100 others. It felt like yours. A tiny act of free will in a vast universe. But what if it wasn't a choice at all? What if it was just numbers resolving themselves, the way a calculator chooses that 2 plus 2 is 4? What if you are not a person having an experience, but a process being run? This is not science fiction anymore. Some serious physicists, philosophers, and computer scientists think there is a real, non-zero chance that the universe you're living in right now is a simulation. Not a metaphor. Not a thought experiment for stoned undergrads. An actual, literal simulation running on hardware we cannot see, built by minds we cannot imagine. Let's find out if they're onto something, or if reality just got a really good marketing team. The argument for the simulation. The most famous version of this idea comes from philosopher Nick Bostrom, and it isn't really an argument that we are in a simulation. It's a statistical trap. Here's the logic. Imagine a civilization advanced enough to simulate entire universes full of conscious minds, the way we simulate weather patterns or galaxy formation today, just far more advanced. If even one such civilization exists anywhere, at any point in the history of everything, and if they run even a handful of these simulations, the math gets uncomfortable fast. A civilization with enough computing power could run not just one simulated universe, but billions of them. Simulated people, having simulated childhoods, simulated heartbreaks, simulated late nights wondering if they're simulated. Think about what that actually means at scale. Every simulated civilization could itself eventually build computers powerful enough to simulate ITS-01 universes, nested inside the first one, which could nest more inside themselves. Simulations within simulations within simulations, like an infinite hall of mirrors, each one just as convincing to the minds trapped inside it as your life feels to you right now. If you did the accounting of every conscious mind that has ever existed, real ones in base reality versus simulated ones inside computers, the simulated minds would vastly outnumber the real ones, which means that statistically, if you are a conscious mind wondering about this right now, you are far more likely to be one of the simulated many than one of the real few. It's the same logic as being born on Earth instead of Mars, not because Earth is special, but because almost everyone who could exist exists here. This isn't proof. It's a probability trap built entirely on assumptions that consciousness can run on non-biological hardware, that civilizations don't destroy themselves first, and that someone, somewhere, wants to bother simulating you specifically doing your laundry. But even as a thought experiment, it's the reason some very serious people started looking for cracks in the wall of reality. Cracks in reality. If the universe is a simulation, you'd expect it to behave less like open, infinite space and more like a program. Something with limits, shortcuts, and a minimum resolution. And weirdly, physics has some candidates. Zoom into matter far enough, and you hit the Planck length, a distance so small that our current physics simply stops making sense below it. Space and time, as we understand them, seem to lose meaning. Some have wondered if this is reality's pixel size. The smallest unit the simulation bothers rendering, the same way a video game doesn't calculate detail smaller than a single pixel. Then there's quantum mechanics, which has always been the universe's weirdest feature. Particles don't seem to have a definite location until you look at them. Before observation, they exist as a smear of probabilities. To some, this looks suspiciously like a program that only renders detail when a player is looking, saving computing power everywhere else. The same way a video game doesn't load a forest behind you until you turn around. There's also the holographic principle, a real and heavily studied idea in theoretical physics, suggesting that all the information needed to describe a three-dimensional volume of space could, in theory, be encoded on its two-dimensional boundary. Like the universe is a 3D projection generated from a flatter, simpler code underneath. Some physicists take this even further, treating information itself as more fundamental than matter or energy. In this view, particles aren't tiny balls of stuff, they're bundles of information, bits being processed. And if reality is, at its core, made of information rather than substance, the line between physical universe and computer program gets blurry in a way that should make anyone a little uneasy. Hunting for glitches. If all of this sounds untestable, a few scientists decided to actually go looking anyway. One idea involves cosmic rays, the highest energy particles ever detected, slamming into our atmosphere from deep space. Some researchers proposed that if space itself were built from an underlying grid or lattice, like the pixels of a screen, then the direction these particles travel would be subtly restricted, bent slightly to align with the grid instead of flowing freely in every possible direction. So they looked, and so far, nothing. The particles arrive from every direction, smooth and unrestricted, showing no sign of a hidden lattice underneath. Other researchers have gone hunting inside the fundamental constants of physics itself, numbers like the speed of light or the strength of gravity. If these were the equivalent of settings in a program, maybe, just maybe, we'd catch them drifting slightly over cosmic time, the way a poorly optimized game might stutter under load. Decades of incredibly precise measurements have found these constants to be remarkably, almost suspiciously, stable. None of these searches found a glitch. But that's not nothing. Each failed search for a crack in reality is also evidence, of a kind, that if we do live inside a simulation, it is either flawless or built well beyond our current ability to detect it at all. None of this proves simulation. But it does prove something else. Reality has structure, limits, and rules that feel suspiciously like they were written down somewhere. Whether that somewhere is a fundamental law of physics or a line of code is a question our current science cannot answer. And that gap between looks like code and is code is exactly where most physicists get off the train. Why most physicists are skeptical? Here's the uncomfortable truth about the simulation hypothesis. It is currently unfalsifiable. There is no experiment you could run, no telescope you could point, no particle you could smash that would definitively prove or disprove it. And in science, an idea you cannot test is closer to philosophy than physics. Critics point out that the universe follows precise mathematical rules, and the universe is a computer simulation are two very different claims being quietly swapped for one another. Reality being describable by math doesn't mean reality. S-math running on a machine, any more than a hurricane being describable by equations, means a hurricane is secretly a computer. There's also a deeper problem. Any simulation needs hardware. Hardware needs matter, energy, and physical space to exist in, which means somewhere, in whatever base reality hosts the simulation, there must exist an underlying physical universe obeying its own laws, which just moves the mystery of existence one level up without actually answering anything. Why does that universe exist? Is it simulated too? You end up with an infinite regression of simulations inside simulations, solving nothing. Some physicists also point out a practical limit. Simulating a universe down to the quantum level for every particle, everywhere, all the time, might require more computing power than could ever exist inside that same universe. You cannot fit a perfect model of something inside a smaller version of that same thing. At some point, the simulators would have to cut corners, render less detail, fake the small stuff. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what the strange fuzziness of quantum mechanics actually is. Or maybe it's simply how a genuinely physical universe behaves at small scales, no coding required. And then there's Occam's razor, one of science's oldest and most trusted tools. When two explanations both fit the evidence, prefer the simpler one. The universe is a physical universe that follows physical laws is a dramatically simpler explanation than the universe is a simulation built by an advanced civilization we have no evidence for, running on physics we cannot detect, for reasons we cannot know. For most physicists, the simulation hypothesis isn't wrong so much as untestable, unfalsifiable, and unnecessarily complicated. Interesting philosophy, not yet science. So does it matter? Here's the strange part. Even if we could somehow prove tomorrow that everything is simulated, almost nothing about your life would actually change. The pain would still hurt. The people you love would still matter to you, whether they're made of atoms or of code. Your choices would still have consequences within the only reality you will ever get to experience. Whether the universe is real in some ultimate cosmic sense, or a staggeringly detailed simulation good enough to fool everyone inside it, you are still here, still thinking, still capable of wonder, curiosity, and connection. And maybe that's actually the most human thing about this whole question. We built computers. We started simulating weather, then cells, then brains. And almost immediately, we turned the telescope back on ourselves and asked, wait, could WE be the simulation? It says something wonderful about a species that the moment it invents a new kind of tool, it uses that tool to interrogate the nature of its own existence. Maybe that's the actual lesson hiding inside this thought experiment. Not, are we in a simulation, but does it even matter if we are? Because whether you're built from stardust or from code, you're still the only version of you that will ever get to exist, in the only reality you will ever get to touch. Make it count either way.